Yee, 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 yee. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to my beautiful audience, my viewers at home. Welcome to Man on Open Studio. It's a show about alcohol abuse, and it's a show that is going to shine the spotlight on how men in our society are abusing alcohol. Our topic for today is relapse and prevention. And to talk more on the topic, we have a philanthropist, a businessman, and a man that knows more about relapse and prevention more than any of us because he has worked the steps. Mr. Douglas Kemp! Yeah. Welcome, man.
Hi, brother.
Yeah, Mr. Douglas Kemp, thank you,
Yes,
man.
sir.
I know you're a busy man.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking your time to be here. Mr. Douglas Kemp, you've been busy. You've been busy with a lot of stuff, man. I've seen some of your work on the internet. You're doing great. I'm so impressed. Let's get straight to it.
Right.
Yeah. You were at some point you were high on your career, but you were secretly drowning with alcohol.
Right.
You struggled secretly with an excessive drinking, and at some point you realized that it was wrong. At what point did you realize that you have a problem, if I may ask?
I think with many people, and myself included, there gets to a point where one has to sort of realize that there's something going on. And I think a lot of that came from friends and family members.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was very much the birth of my daughter, or the pending birth of my daughter. And I realized that my lifestyle was just way too reckless with the amount of alcohol that I was consuming at the time. And my wife threatened to leave me, and that didn't change the situation very much. And then suddenly when my daughter was coming onto the scene, I realized that I needed to make a significant and major change in my life. And when I did that, I started on a path of recovery, which I'm still on today. And I think that many people, they call it a motivational value system, where some value of yours that's internal outweighs the need to continue with the alcohol. And that motivational value system might be different for many different people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You kept relapsing for over 5 years or so, man.
Yes.
At what point were you like, this is cool, I've done it?
So
I'm
that's
sober now.
that point of realization where I went into sobriety was the end point of 5 years. Prior to that, I spent in perpetual relapse. So I was the typical weekend warrior type drinker, with drinking during the week, but also drinking excessively on weekends.
Yeah, I know that.
And getting myself into more and more situations, and then finally making the decision sort of 5 years prior to that to stop drinking. But it would never really last all that long. I would stop 1 week, and the next week I'd be sober, and the next week I'd be completely off the wall again. And I couldn't stop that process. That just kept on happening to me again and again and again and again. And till I discovered what relapse prevention was about, and which is why I started the Relapse Prevention Foundation, which is
Tell us more about that anyway.
the foundation.
The foundation and
So
what you do.
it's a non-profit organization that we started about 2 years ago. It's geared at creating an online program that explores all the different elements and methodologies that people use to get into recovery. And I've created it on a YouTube video format and put it into like an online learning system. So much like you get your universities now, where you can actually apply to university and do all your lectures online.
Yeah.
This takes psychotherapy, takes mindfulness, takes all the different areas of recovery, and has them on video lectures basically. So that's all accessible through a learning management system that we've created on the website.
That's super
So it's
cool.
a project in production.
Yeah.
We've got one project done out the door already now, which is on the Recovery Direct domain.
Yeah.
So that's just purely addiction recovery.
Okay. Is there any questions from the audience to Mr. Douglas?
Hello, good day. So I wanted to know when the craving for alcohol occurs, what do you do in order to get over that, and how do you find your way around that?
So craving in itself is a psychological process. So the physical addiction to a substance you're actually over quite quickly. So in the first 8 days of being detoxed from alcohol, you actually detox from alcohol. But thereafter, you've got this constant gnawing craving and so on. So effectively, what happens in a craving situation is that your brain is creating an anxiety, and that anxiety is looking for an outlet, and that substance being the outlet that it's craving, so to speak. And what happens with cravings is they go to a peak and then they start to dissipate. And so what one needs to do is learn a behavior that disables that anxiety before it gets to a peak, a peak period, which dramatically reduces the need to actually go to follow on to actually take the substance. So certainly things like mindfulness training, where you start to become more aware of your different emotions that you're feeling at any point in time, and then starting to choose more appropriate emotions for those situations, is a very powerful tool to use, specifically in craving. And once you become more adept at using those tools, the cravings become almost insignificant historical events of getting over your alcohol use disorder. I hope it answers your question.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Thanks for the question. Mr. Douglas, now, you said you needed to stop so badly, and you felt that your life is depending on it, and you knew that you were not supposed to follow any traditional methods. Why not?
Well, I guess that I'd been into traditional 12-step treatment situations before, and it just wasn't resonating with me. So for me, it was never about a higher power being missing in my life. And I think that a lot of the traditional methods, if you were to say that, is to go the 12-step route and to accept a higher power into being part of your life and in control. For me, it was very much around my alcohol use disorder was very much focused around social anxiety and anxieties that I felt in the context of social work or purely social environments. And so I knew that was more the problem than the lack of a higher power. And so I needed something that addressed that problem, not so much the theological problem.
Okay. We're just gonna go to the ad break quickly. Thank you to my wonderful audience. Thanks to the viewers at home. Please stay tuned. We quickly go into the advert. You are watching Man to Man on Open Studio, a show about alcohol abuse. We'll see you just now. Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Welcome back, the viewers at home. Welcome back, my beautiful audience, man. Welcome back, Mr. Douglas. You on Man to Man. You're watching Man to Man on Open Studio, a show about alcohol abuse, a show that's going to highlight all things to do with how men are abusing alcohol in our society and how that is affecting our daily lives in the communities. Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Thank you so much for hanging with me, man. I'm really enjoying this. You are now more than 11 years sober. What was the process, and how long did it take for you to say, I'm free?
You know, it's very difficult to say when you suddenly realize that you're actually over this.
Yeah.
You know, many people can stop drinking and not be over it. You know, what was driving that problem still is there. And a lot of people go into rehabilitation centers and they go into different areas and they don't come out fixed. They come out sober, but they not come out fixed. And I'd say for me, it's only been in the last 4 years of my sobriety that I've actually realized what was really fueling my alcohol use and started to deal with that end of it, you know. And up until then, I was just a sober alcoholic. You know, if
So I go to AA meetings sometimes.
right,
Yeah,
good,
and I hear people saying, "Hi, I'm Zazu. I've been 3 years and 5 months sober. I suddenly relapsed." Tell me,
there's a
have
lot
you
of
ever been through that? Have you ever been like, after 3 years, I'm relapsing now again? And what was what?
one has to really kind of take into consideration, what does relapse mean. You know, if a guy goes out and has a couple of drinks with a couple of mates, and then goes home straight afterwards, even if he's been sober for the 10 plus years, is that destructive drinking? No, he just went out for a couple of drinks with a couple of mates. But according to the AA program, he's relapsed. He now has to go back from 3 years sobriety to one day sober and start again. So there's a problem with the 12-step program in that the person hasn't fully relapsed just because they've gone out and had a couple of beers with a friend, and not turned back into a self-destructive lifestyle around alcohol. So the benchmark really needs to be, you know, has the person nosedived their life back into alcohol abuse to the point where it's destructive to their life again? And let's take all the stigma that's associated with having a beer, as to, you know, as has this person relapsed into a destructive lifestyle again, or have they just had a beer with their friends, which is perfectly normal, and gone home and had a normal, because there's no black and white inside of the 12-step program.
So what you're saying is that you're not relapsing if you're not drowning your life, because it's actually about what happened to your life before you figure out that you had a problem. I get you, and I hope
relapse is really when you turn back to. So the word relapse itself, it's Latin. It actually means turning away from God.
Wow.
So it has connotations in its own right, and these things are all part of the stigmas that are associated to addiction, specifically substance use and alcohol use disorders. So relapse in itself is something that you know, you're not turning your back on God. It's about going and having a beer with a mate. 12-step is very stringent about it because their program is based around total abstinence. But what we're learning now and what we're seeing in human beings is that people are able to, in certain circumstances, have an alcohol use disorder, solve the problems, and continue to have a normal life that includes alcohol in non-destructive ways thereafterwards. But one can't just do that blindly. It has to be done methodically and understanding what is happening with what drove your alcohol use disorder from the beginning. You can't just sort of go, okay, I never solved that problem, okay, I can drink normally now. It's not going to work. You're going to relapse completely. But yeah, so there's...
I hear you, Mr. Douglas. Can you please get a question quickly from the audience?
Okay, yeah, I've got a question. I noticed like a lot of alcohol being promoted in music videos, on billboards, and it seems to be associated with being cool these days and with being successful. And I notice a lot of young people are kind of getting drawn into using alcohol in that way. So
Right.
what measures can be taken to prevent?
So certainly I think that there's responsibilities that are incumbent on alcohol advertising. Certainly when we use alcohol as part of aspirational lifestyles, it is irresponsible advertising. However, when we look at alcohol in the context of social, it's actually much more resonant on the youth as to who they're drinking with and how are people drinking around them than any billboard. So a youth is far more influenced by their immediate social environment than they are influenced by external factors like advertising. But that being said, you know, there are certain responsibilities in terms of advertising alcohol that I think should be adhered to. It's certainly not an aspirational life product, and but it also shouldn't be hidden away from people, because then it creates the other, the want and the need for it. Certainly under Prohibition in America, that was quite a classic example of that. But yeah, your social environment is far more important to get the social environments correct for the youth of South Africa. And those are the tight social networks that they deal with in terms of their friends, their families, and their educators, so to speak. More important than the advertisers.
Okay. Quickly, Mr. Douglas, from your point of view, why do you think people that go to the traditional route, like the counseling, the meeting, the AA programs and stuff, why do you think people that goes there, most of them go there and relapse after years of not using a substance?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because there isn't really a traditional route into addiction recovery. It depends very much on the individual themselves. Invariably, relapse and constant relapse is not addressing the underlying problem correctly. So in a person going into a 12-step program that is not going to accept the higher power, that is not going to focus on the elements of the 12-step program, is going to find themselves in perpetual relapse. Similarly, if somebody goes into a psychologist's office and just ignores the psychologist and doesn't deal with the underlying issues, they're going to find themselves in perpetual relapse. So it really is a deeply personal question as to what's going wrong with you as a person, and then let's try to find what that problem is and how we can solve that. And the tools to solve it, there is innumerable tools out there, from yoga and mindfulness and 12-step programs and therapy and pastoral counseling, social work, etc. These are all elements that can be used to help a person through an alcohol use disorder.
Okay, thank you, man. We're going to link to an ad break quickly. Thank you to my beautiful audience, the viewers at home. Please keep watching. We're going to an ad break quickly. You're watching Man to Man, and a show about alcohol abuse on Open Studio. We'll be back. Thank you to my audience, to my guest, Mr. Douglas Kemp, and my viewers at home. You are watching Man to Man on Open Studio, a show about alcohol abuse. We're hanging with Mr. Douglas Kemp, the man that knows more about relapse and prevention than most of us. Mr. Douglas Kemp, after what you've been through, do you think that enough is being done to stop people from abusing alcohol?
No. I think that certainly we're living in a society that deeply misunderstands alcohol use disorder, and we have traditionally gone this vindictive, painful route of legislation and so on to try to deal with it. And over the last 100 years, it hasn't changed much. And this doesn't change with substances or alcohol. It's got to do with substances across the board. And so our legal system is inundated with problems that are created by alcohol use disorders. And if you just spend a day in the magistrate's court, you'll soon realize that it's driving under the influence, it's abuse. There's lots and lots of problems that are all centered around alcohol use. And we're not fixing it as a society by doing what we're currently doing. And we need to do something fundamentally different as a society to be able to rectify this problem that has been created over time. And that rectification process cannot entail more punitive action, such as legal action. It has to contain action that is restorative, to the degree that we do have to realize that South Africa's a very young country that's grown up with a great deal of trauma. And that trauma is often the catalyst to substance use disorders. And if we start to look at dealing with the problem of substance use disorders, then we need to start dealing with the trauma that our society has dealt with up until now, as the problem, not so much the the symptom of the problem, which is the substance use disorders.
Tell me, do you think for drinkers out there, for anybody like normal people that drinks now, do you think at some point in their lives, if a person says they're working, they're just drinking like with friends only in the weekends or so, they're just drinking, they're not really abusing alcohol, but do you think it is bound to happen at some point in their life?
No, not necessarily. I mean, only 10% of people that drink alcohol come to the point of drinking alcohol problematically. So no, there's no people who normally use drugs and normally use alcohol. So they shouldn't be barred from using the substance. It's not the substance becomes a problem when it becomes destructive to your lifestyle or the lifestyle of the people around you. So by all means, have a beer. By all means, do whatever. But
it shouldn't affect
when
your
it becomes destructive to you, your lifestyle, or the lifestyle of the people around you, that's when you need to start seeking help. And don't let your lifestyle completely crash before you start looking for help with substances like alcohol.
I hear you. Let's quickly just take a question from the audience quickly. A beautiful lady down at the back.
You've spoken a lot about mindfulness. I just wondered if you could talk us through, in practice, how does mindfulness help with substance abuse disorders?
In many, many, many ways. So people that struggle with alcohol use disorder find themselves in a lifestyle of chaos. That chaos is often by pressures that are on them as individuals, under work pressures, under social pressures, under marital stresses, etc. And they begin to live a life that's unmanaged. And the way they begin to manage that lifestyle is through switching to a new target such as alcohol. And alcohol temporarily relieves that stress and that unmanaged lifestyle. Whereas mindfulness is really just a case of, it's a fancy word for taking the time to establish one's self in the present moment and realize what emotions one is feeling at that point in time, and then choosing whether those emotions are valid or not, and removing the power of potentially detrimental emotions in one's day-to-day lifestyle. So maybe I should explain that in a different way. Mindfulness is really just about not judging situations that you're in on a day-to-day basis by what you perceive them to be or remember them that could have been something like this, as understanding them for what they are in the actual present moment without the fear. And it's a lifelong journey to start establishing mindfulness as part of your day-to-day operation. But in the context of addiction recovery, certainly to deal with things like craving, mindfulness is, brings you into the present moment, realizing that you're not in any kind of threat, and then making the most appropriate decision for that present moment. And that present moment is what we also call in recovery the key moment. It's the key moment where I decide to go back to a substance. It's a key moment where I decide to act out in a destructive way to my spouse or to somebody that's in my immediate environment, that would then in turn cause me to go back to the substance. So mindfulness is about really starting to dial into your emotions, choose the right ones for the right situations that you're in, and then be able to mindfully handle those situations without going into paths of self-destruction.
Yo, wow. It's powerful, man. Yeah. Okay.
That's just mindfulness, dude. There's lots of stuff like that.
What are you, how do we get hold of you, man?
Well, look, the relapse prevention project is on relapseprevention.co today. You can also search for, there's a closed group on Facebook called Relapse Prevention Community. There's quite a few thousand people in there already. So on the web mainly, in about 2 months' time, we should be launching the relapse prevention course.
Yeah, yeah,
That will cover mindfulness,
yeah.
and it'll cover relapses, and it'll cover all the strategies that people use to find recovery.
Okay.
So we've interviewed some wonderful people who use yoga in recovery. You know, meditation's another a great source of centering.
Yeah.
And certainly I think that there's a lot of value in a course like that.
Okay.
And it's very accessible, almost free,
Yeah,
almost.
Thank you so much, man. To my beautiful audience, to my viewers at home, thank you so much. Visit our Facebook and like us, Man to Man, a show about alcohol abuse. Thank you so much for joining today. Until next time, see you. Bye.